Welcome back to Shred Guitar in the 80s. Today I thought it'd be a fun day to kind of talk about how I evolved, the evolution of my playing, how I started out, what I was listening to, and really talk about some of the guitar players and albums that really changed my whole life as a guitar player. There are so many. I've never just been into one guy. I've always loved so many players that there's so many I don't even know if I can remember them all. But I thought I'd break this down into a couple parts, and I thought we'd cover my early influences today from the late 70s through about 1983 or 84. There were so many killer guitar players during that era that just blew my mind that I would sit down for hours and try to learn all their licks. I was always a guy that tried to learn everything by a guitar player that I liked. I would buy all the magazines, read about them, buy every album, anything I could find on that guitar player or band that I loved. And I think it really benefited me. I didn't really listen to just one player. I listened to so many that I took and stole so many little bits and pieces from different players that I just mixed it all together and created my own style. So I thought it'd be fun today to talk about chronologically some of the albums that influenced me and talk a little bit about what I got from each player and, you know, basically how they changed my whole life, my whole playing style. So let's get started. When I was a young kid, and it was probably the early to mid 70s, I was born in 1967, so I really started getting into music. My mother loved music. She just played it constantly around the house. Used to listen to Casey Kasem's Top 40 every Sunday night. I just loved all the killer songs on the radio back then. I mean, some of them are kind of corny looking back now, but there were a lot of amazing songs. But nothing really prepared me for what I was about to get into or how my life would change when I heard the next band, Kiss. They were the first rock band that were my band, the band that I kind of discovered on my own through a great friend of mine named Todd Moore, lived down the street from me. Him and his brother, his older brothers, would listen to this Kiss Alive and Destroyer. I think at the time Kiss Destroyer was the album that was just released, so that was the first Kiss album I got. The next one was Kiss Alive, and while I love Destroyer, Kiss Alive was just a landmark album for me. I remember just listening to that album, it just felt like I was in the concert. I felt like the crowd was around me and I was experiencing everything live. Even though they said there's a lot of overdubs on that album, I don't care. I still consider it to be one of my favorites, or probably my favorite live guitar album, or just live album of all time, in terms of how it had such a huge impact on me. And when I still put it on, it still just blows my mind how killer it is. I usually listen to Kiss around Christmas because in the mid to late 70s, Christmas is when I got a lot of my Kiss albums, and it was such a huge part of growing up for me, the Kiss stuff. I had Kiss scrapbooks. At the time, Gene was my favorite player. And I thought, well, I'll play bass, you know. But for Christmas in 1978, I got an acoustic guitar, and that changed everything. But this album, Kiss Alive, was just mind-blowing. This is my original copy from back in the 70s. I used to stare at the album covers of all these great albums and just listen to all the songs. There's so many great songs in here. Do Strutter, Got to Choose, all the classics. As far as I'm concerned, this was the peak Kiss, and everything after, even though I still bought it up until probably Unmasked. And I kind of got into some stuff later, which I'll talk about, but generally this is the peak stuff for me with Kiss Alive. There were so many cool guitar moments on Kiss Alive. I love the little break in Parasite, that killer little break before the solo. I always loved that. the little outro to She on the live album, which actually came from the end of the song Let Me Know off their debut album. But that little riff, just, I love playing that. I remember when I first figured it out, I sat around and just played it constantly and just probably drove everyone crazy. The next band that I really got into was AC/DC. I'll never forget, some friends of mine came over and they had a cassette player, one of those boom boxes, and they were jamming AC/DC, and I was like, what is that? I was into Kiss, but this was like even cooler and even heavier to me than Kiss. It was really rocking. At the time that I really got into AC/DC, Kiss kind of changed directions. They put out Dynasty, and they lost me a little bit. And AC/DC just picked up right where Kiss left off for me. And I bought everything I could by AC/DC. I bought the Australian import albums. I bought anything I could find. And my two favorite albums were Power Rage and the live album, If You Want Blood. And I would just listen to them constantly. And at the time, I really started playing a lot at that time. And Angus Young and Malcolm Young were huge influences on me. And those riffs and those songs were just perfect for where I was at as a guitar player. So I still love AC/DC to this day, and whenever I hear them, it just takes me right back to that time period. The cool thing for me as a guitar player is that I started out with Kiss, and I got into AC/DC, so I kind of had a foundation of good solid rock guitar playing before I started to go out into the shred zone and just try to play all the crazy stuff. At the time, I was just really grooving, but it really gave me a good sense of rhythm, and the pentatonic scales and what notes sounded great, and my bending and my touch, and I really developed a lot of that during those early years. The next band that I really got into after AC/DC was Black Sabbath. Huge influence on me. I still love Black Sabbath to this day. Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, which I'll talk about in a minute here, are definitely my two favorite hard rock bands of all time. And I remember going to my neighbor's house and they sold me 3 albums. They sold me the debut album from Black Sabbath, the amazing Black Sabbath, Paranoid, the legendary Paranoid, and Deep Purple Made in Japan. And for 75 cents, I got 3 of the greatest albums in the history of rock. After listening to AC/DC and Kiss and trying to play to those records, I could kind of cop the Black Sabbath stuff pretty quick. The cool thing was there was some modal stuff in Black Sabbath. I started to learn more scales, Some of the solos that Tony did, he did some nice Dorian runs, and he'd throw in different things. It was really cool. And I just love that stuff to death. I mean, the first album was really the album that I devoured the most in terms of like his soloing. I loved Tony's soloing. Everyone talks about his riff. Man, the soloing on that album was just incredible. Behind the Wall of Sleep, just brilliant stuff. And Black Sabbath was huge. And right when I got that first Black Sabbath album, I started taking lessons. I remember my teacher giving me the pentatonic scales, and he told me to go write some solos. So what I did was I just stole Tony Iommi's solos from the first Black Sabbath album, went back the next week, and I would sit down with the records. I always try to figure stuff out by ear. My ear got pretty good. I remember going back and playing the solos, and he says, "That you sound like Tony Iommi." But I was ripping off Tony Iommi, so I guess I achieved what I was setting out to do. Just brilliant stuff. I love Tony's playing a lot. These albums are just incredible, and I still listen to Sabbath all the time. So I bought those 2 Black Sabbath albums for $1 and this amazing album by Deep Purple, Made in Japan. Another incredible live album, one of the greatest live albums ever. The cool thing about this album, there are no overdubs. I think it's all just how Deep Purple sounded at the time. And for my money, they were the tightest, most consistent, and probably the best musicians, pound for pound, of any band during that era. They were so consistent. The mighty Led Zeppelin, who's another huge influence on me, and I love all the Zeppelin stuff, were great. But if you listen to the old recordings of Zeppelin, they were spotty. They were either totally brilliant or they were kind of a little sloppy. But that sloppy's still really cool. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But Deep Purple were super consistent, and I've collected tons of live recordings from Deep Purple over the years, and they've always just been brilliant. And Ritchie Blackmore became like my number one guy. He became my first guitar hero. Before that, I loved the band, so I loved AC/DC. I loved Agnes, and I loved Ace and Tony. It was like about the whole band. With Ritchie, it became like about Ritchie Blackmore. So I just went out and bought tons of Deep Purple stuff. So I'll share a few of my favorite Deep Purple albums with you here. Machine Head was another album that I just devoured. This album probably was one of my biggest influences as a guitar player. It had the most impact on me. The cool thing about this album, it has every kind of groove that I needed to play. You had your up-tempo Highway Star, your really funky Maybe I'm Leo, the cool swing of Lazy, the straightforward rock of, Space Truck, and just brilliant, amazing stuff, amazing playing on this album. Super clean, every solo was super memorable. Ritchie's technique was just perfect, every note perfect. His touch, the touch of Ritchie's been a huge influence on me, that beautiful, he just has a light touch that I've always tried to cop. His vibrato is beautiful. Can't say enough, this album is just tremendous. And when people ask me, what's a good thing to practice to? I always say, go get Deep Purple Machine Head and just practice jamming to every song on this album, and you'll be able to play just about anything with anyone in the rock context because it covers so many different killer grooves. Just a brilliant album. My favorite Deep Purple albums generally tend to be the live albums. I love the Mark III lineup here. Incredible concert live at the California Jam. Just amazing stuff. Ritchie starts out Mistreated and he does those tremolo pick notes. That's just mind-blowing for me, man. I still love that. Another one of my favorites is Made in Europe. Just another brilliant album from that lineup. Just outstanding. I got all the Deep Purple stuff. I love the reunion stuff. This Perfect Strangers album, when it first came out, was another one. I just loved it. I devoured it like crazy. House of Blue Light after it is another album I love. Just anything by Deep Purple with Ritchie Blackmore I love. I can't say enough about it. So after I got into Purple, I thought, I just got to get everything by Ritchie Blackmore. And I went out and bought the Rainbow stuff. And it was amazing. And that's when the classical elements started to come in. I really loved the classical elements and some of the Eastern stuff that Rainbow did. Just brilliant. All the Ronnie James Dio albums are incredible. The Rainbow Rising, the Amazing Stargazer. What else can you say? Probably one of the greatest songs ever written. Terror Woman's a killer opening track. I love every song on this. This is one of those albums that everyone needs to have. It's just amazing. And then I really got into the Joe Lynn Turner era too. There's the Difficult to Cure album. So all those albums were huge for me. Just excellent, mind-blowing stuff. I can't say enough about it. Ritchie's still in my top 5 favorite players of all time to this day. So after Deep Purple, the next band that I really got into and discovered, and the guitar player, the next one that really came on my radar, was Uli Jon Roth with the Scorpions. Just amazing. Scorpions wrote amazing songs, and I think I first got into Scorpions around the Love Drive era. I think right around that period. So they had Schenker on that album, the incredible Michael Schenker, which I'll talk about in a second. But I went back and bought the Tokyo Tapes album, and the Tokyo Tapes album was just another album that was mind-blowing for me. Uli did all these killer bends and had kind of a Hendrix vibe mixed with kind of classical music in some of the parts. And the thing that I loved about Uli, his solos were so thematic. They almost sounded worked out, and every note was just perfect. It was perfectly placed. His phrasing just had a tremendous impact on me. He never rushed anything. Everything was in the pocket. He let everything breathe with that beautiful vibrato. Just an amazing album. Every song on this album just, I think, is perfect too, and I still listen to this one all the time. It's just been a huge influence on me. And I love all the Scorpions. I love all the periods of Scorpions music, from Uli right up till nowadays. Just amazing stuff. And Uli's definitely another one of those players that had a huge impact on me. One of the first places I would check out whenever I'd go to the record store, and I went there a couple times a week to just scour the racks trying to find a cool band. And when I went to the import section, I found this killer album by Scorpions called Lonesome Crow, and I took it home and it had this Michael Schenker on it, this 16-year-old Michael Schenker, who I'd read a little bit about in the guitar magazines. When I heard it, it just was killer. It sounded, on this album, it kind of reminded me like a hyper Jimmy Page, super melodic, just super clean though, and his phrasing was beautiful. And it stuck with me. I listened to this album a lot. The music was a little different. It was kind of trippy and a little bit of kind of a stoner vibe going on there. It's just amazing stuff. Like In Search of Peace of Mind, I recognized that from the live album. But just a really fun album. So after I got into that, I went out and bought Michael Schenker. The first Michael Schenker album that I got was this one, One Night at Budokan. And this is another live album that is considered one of the best of all time in my opinion. And when I took it home and played it, the tone and the touch of Michael Schenker was just mind-blowing. It was so fluid. I never heard anybody up to that point play kind of with that fluidity of Schenker. Just played blistering lines straight down, totally clean. But the cool thing was that Schenker's phrasing was just amazing. So any time he'd play a fast run or anything, it had a swing to it and just this elasticity of the phrasing. I can't even stress how much that has influenced me as a player. And where he'd leave the holes and everything was just amazing. And the tone in this album with that cocked wah-wah was just totally mind-blowing for me. I mean, whenever I listen to this album, I want to pick up my guitar and play with that tone. You know, it's just incredible. And this is chock full of all the Schenker classics from the first two albums. Just an amazing record and a huge influence on me. All the Schenker stuff's brilliant. By that time, I was a certified Michael Schenker nut, and I went out and bought all the UFO stuff also. My favorite albums by UFO are Phenomenon and Obsession. The guitar tone in Obsession, I can't say enough about it. It's just absolutely incredible. And the solos on this, I think this might be some of the best playing ever from any guitar player in this album. I mean, the phrasing and the touch and everything. Michael Schenker is just, I really can't stress just what a huge influence Michael's been on my playing. I'm going to cover more stuff on my channel here of Schenker. I haven't really covered him like I should because he's been a huge influence on me. That touch and tone and note choice is just incredible. So all the UFO stuff's just brilliant also. So right around the time period that I discovered the Scorpions, I also discovered a band and a guitar player that would have an impact on me like no other. If I had to rank one guitar player that influenced me more than anyone else, it would definitely be Eddie Van Halen. Like a whole generation of guitar players my age, Eddie was just the man, the most mind-blowing thing I'd ever heard up to that point. Just incredible. I'll never forget my brother put on this album, Van Halen 1, and I was down in the basement hanging out with my friends, and we had speakers down there, and Run With the Devil came out. I thought it was really cool. And then I heard Eruption, and it changed everything. I remember just standing there with my jaw open. Just could not believe what I was hearing. Just amazing. It just blew everyone's mind back then. You know, I mean, it was so groundbreaking and so new, you can't even put into words what an impact. But it wasn't just that, it was the tone, the touch, the note choice, the swing, the feel. I mean, a lot of it was almost like a horn player, the way Eddie phrased and the way he could swing things. Every song on here is just brilliant. I can't say enough about Van Halen 1. And then I got Van Halen 2, and it had Spanish Fly, Light Up the Sky, DOA. Every song just incredible. Devoured that one like crazy. And then Women and Children First. I love that really loose, bluesy intro to Fools, into that really kick-ass, just amazing guitar, unaccompanied guitar solo into the main riff. Just amazing stuff. And A Cradle Will Rock was just mind-blowing with that killer solo and the keyboard through the Marshall. Just every song on here is another one. I mean, these albums, I lived and breathed these albums. I would come home from school, throw on Van Halen, just spend my entire evening trying to learn Van Halen songs. You know, my grades showed that I wasn't really applying myself like I should, but it was worth it because this stuff changed everything for me. I'll never forget when I first bought this album and took it home and heard that intro to Mean Street. I was like, what is that? I mean, you know, as a young player, you hear something like that, it's like from outer space, you know. You didn't even think in your head that something like that was achievable. Eddie was just brilliant. He was so intuitive. He didn't think about it. I don't think he overthought things, man. He just played from his heart and would just move his hands and do it till it sounded good and come up with all this cool stuff. I mean, a true innovator like Eddie is so rare. And he had it all, the tone, the touch, the phrasing, just amazing. I mean, the solo on Push Comes to Shove is a thing of beauty. It's just perfection. This album is just a must for every guitar fan. It's a very special album. And then you had Diver Down in 1984. All those albums were huge for me. Just devoured them like crazy. I can't say enough about Eddie, man. Eddie was the man. Around that same period, I was a huge Iron Maiden fan. I got into Iron Maiden right around the Killers album. I bought Killers, just an incredible album. Then a number of the Beasts came out with Bruce singing. They became one of my favorite, probably for a short period of time, just in terms of songs and that album was just like my favorite. I listened to it like crazy. I got to see him in concert. I got to see Rainbow and Iron Maiden in concert. And Iron Maiden opened up for Rainbow. What a concert. Richie was just awesome. He played kind of a short show. I don't know if he got mad. I remember he threw his guitar into the crowd and walked off, but you know, whatever I got from Richie was brilliant. And Iron Maiden were just amazing. They were young, full of energy on that Number of the Beast tour. Just brilliant. I saw them on Peace of Mind, another brilliant tour. Power Slave. One of my favorite Maiden albums is Somewhere in Time. This is probably the one I listen to the most nowadays. I just love the tones, that kind of 80s ambient, kind of reverby sound. Brilliant stuff. Maiden was definitely another band that influenced me big time. So Eddie was number one for me. I just devoured the Van Halen stuff. And the next guy that really come on and just changed everything for me after Eddie was Randy Rhodes. I'll never forget listening to WMMS in Cleveland in 1981 on a Friday or Saturday night, the weekend, and Crazy Train came on. And I heard the iconic Crazy Train riff into the cool finger tapping thing. I thought, who is this? And I rushed out and bought the album, and Randy Rhodes just blew my mind, and he became right there with Eddie. They were side by side for me. And I remember just devouring all the record stores trying to find bootlegs, you know. So I got like this cool one called Load Up. This one's from Obscurity to Eternity. They had really cool Quiet Riot outtakes and different tracks, live tracks from Ozzy, cool stuff. I actually picked up the Quiet Riot, the original pressing from Japan of Quiet Riot 2 at a record store. That was a cool score. I got the first one on a bootleg. I couldn't find it. The thing with Randy is that WMS played some concerts from Randy with Ozzy. I think one was the King Biscuit Flower Hour. I recorded that. And the other one was like In Concert or something like that. I recorded both those and just listened to them like crazy. And I think the In Concert one would end up to be the Tribute album. So I was listening to it years before Tribute came out. I do think Suicide Solution is actually from the Montreal show though. But the live Randy Rhodes is my favorite Randy Rhodes to this day. Just Randy was brilliant. He had those classical elements. I was into Richie, so Randy was a natural extension of that. I love that distortion plus through a Marshall, especially in the live context. It blew away his studio recordings. His live tone was just massive and huge, and just I loved it. I loved his muting and his phrasing and how accurate he was. So around 1981, I was taking guitar lessons, and my guitar teacher was a big Alan Holdsworth fan. I'll never forget in the first lesson, he played me this Bill Bruford track, Hell's Bells, and he goes, "What do you think of this guitar player?" And I was like, oh my God, you know, those fluid scales and that, it's like his tones would just go on forever. Like, you know, I had not heard anything like Alan, and his touch and his phrasing, and there was kind of a melancholy to Alan's playing that really appealed to me. So I went out and bought the Gong album. I found this Gong album, and the soloing on this is so clean, the tone is brilliant, and it was kind of my introduction to kind of progressive rock. I loved it right off the bat. Then I got the UK album. I loved the UK album too. The Gong one probably a little more because the guitar solos were a little more loose and kind of improv-y. But what can you say? Anything Holdsworth played on is brilliant. Then I got the IOU album, Metal Fatigue, Road Games. All those albums are just incredible. The Tony Williams stuff with Alan, that whole legato approach, just the way Alan would go like... Just brilliant stuff. I loved it. I can't say enough about Holdsworth. So the Alan stuff was huge. Just that touch, that whole legato approach. At the time, I wasn't picking a lot. I was working my left hand, trying to play those Van Halen riffs. I did try to do some of the Randy picking stuff, but my picking chops were nothing like they would become later once I heard Yngwie. But that legato, that fluid approach that I heard Alan do was just really a huge influence on me. And around 1983, right around that same time, I discovered another guitar player who played with a killer legato style that I loved. And that was Warren DeMartini. And I remember getting the first Rat EP and really loving his playing. I could hear the Van Halen elements in there, even a little bit of Randy Rhodes, I thought, but more Van Halen. Just brilliant stuff. By the time Out of the Cellar came on, I was a certified Warren DeMartini nut. I would try to learn all those solos from Warren. That fluid playing. I've done a few videos on Warren's style where I break down his leads and stuff on my channel here that people seem to like, and I'll probably do some more Warren stuff in the future, definitely. But just the 3 note per string scales and all that really came in when I listened to Randy, Eddie, Alan Holdsworth, and Warren DeMartini. solos like on Wanted Man, just that killer legato phrase he'd ended in the phrasing with the bar going in. It kind of reminded me of a heavy metal or hard rock Holdsworth, That killer solo like You're in Trouble, which is the one I showed on my channel here. Round and Round, the chords, the solo is killer. Every solo on here is great. Every song on here is great. I can't say enough about it. And around the same time I got into George Lynch, and I was really into like Tooth and Nail was like my, favorite Dokken album. I love it. And then Under Lock and Key. George is another guy I love. But the Warren DeMartini stuff really has a special place for me in my heart. And I love it. And it's been a huge influence on me. And I can hear little bits of Warren in my playing even to this day. Great stuff. So Kiss was kind of off my radar after they put out Dynasty. I think that's when they kind of lost me and I went in a different direction. But I remember for Christmas, my mom bought me this album, Animalize, on cassette. And I popped it in, and the guitar playing was incredible, I thought. It's so fluid with such great, really memorable solos. It was Mark St. John who played on one album with them. And some of the Kiss fans rag on this album, but I really love this album, maybe for sentimental reasons. But the guitar solos are just great. I've had enough Into the Fire, cool tapping with... He had that slippery feel. I was really into that slippery phrasing. I still am, that Van Halen had or Warren had. And Mark had it on this album. This is a great one. This album I played like crazy. Just brilliant. Another guitar player I really got into is Gary Moore. And my brother had the Corridors of Power album. That I thought was just incredible. He did Wishing Well, The End of the World solo. It was just, I never heard anybody pick like that up to that point. It was incredible. Listen to that like crazy, and about Victims of the Future. Just brilliant stuff. That solo in Empty Rooms, I remember learning that and just listening to it all the time. So Gary was another guy that was a huge influence on me, big time. I used to just devour any music magazine that covered hard rock and metal. Circus, Hit Parader, Guitar Player, Guitar World. Another one was Record Review. And Record Review was really cool because they covered a lot of bands that were really upcoming and obscure. They had a really cool writer. His name was John Sutherland. Just a great writer. And I remember reading about Billy Sheehan and Tallis in there, and Sound Barrier, and Michael Schenker, and Iron Maiden. And they had this really cool article on the Japanese scene, the Japan bands from that early 80s. And the photo really caught my attention, how cool they looked, and that was Loudness. The photo in the magazine was just brilliant. It was black and white, but it had these lights behind it, and they just looked killer. So I thought, what do they sound like? So I went out and bought these two imports. Loudness, Disillusion, and Akura's solo album, Tusk of Jaguar. And these two albums I just wore out. Akura had elements of Van Halen, Randy Rhodes. He had that killer tone. He had the kind of Gary Moore kind of attack. I mean, I just bought everything by Loudness. Kerr was just a huge, huge guitar player for me. And by the time Thunder in the East came out, I was a certified Kerr nut. And he became right there with Van Halen, Randy Rhodes, and Holdsworth and Warren as my favorite players at that time. I bought everything by Loudness. I'm going to do a whole feature on Kerr, I think, in the future. But I went back by like the Birthday Eve. I bought all these on cassette at the time. The imports were great. I could get all the imports at the record store. This live album was one I loved and wore out. One of my favorites is Law of the Devil's Land. It's killer. Birthday Eve. Just all amazing stuff. Can't say enough about Kerr's playing. I love it. Kerr is just amazing. I still go through phases where I need to hear some Loudness. Just great stuff. So I was totally into Randy Rhodes, and when he died, it just devastated me. I'll never forget the day that he died. It was like a cold, rainy, I think it was a Friday, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, though, just going by my memory. And in March, and it devastated me. It really bummed me out because Randy and Eddie were right there. Those two guys were my heroes. I loved them. So when Ozzy came out after Randy's death with Speak of the Devil with this guitar player named Brad Gillis, I wasn't really sure what to think. And being a Black Sabbath fan, when I heard this album, I loved this album. It wasn't like mind-blowing like hearing Van Halen for the first time, but man, it sounded so good. And Brad's tone was so unique at the time. It was kind of wide and fat, kind of slightly flanged, with really cool kind of echoey reverb on it. And it just sounded so cool, and the song sounded great. I loved Tommy Aldridge's drumming on this and Rudy Sarzo's bass playing. This is still one of my favorite live albums, and probably my favorite, other than tribute live Ozzy solo album for sure. Has a cool gatefold. And being like a monster kid, I was a guy that was into like Dracula and Frankenstein, the Wolfman, all that stuff. Godzilla. Kiss and Ozzy and Black Sabbath, they're just like a natural extension for all that. So it was great. And then when he came out with Bark at the Moon with Jake, it was just, he picked up, where they left off. With Diary of a Madman, just great songs and great playing. Even though it wasn't Randy, I still really enjoyed it. It's great stuff. Jake and Brad Gillis were definitely in the mix of guys I would cop licks and listen to back in the day. Another band that I really listened to a lot from the late 70s through 80s was Rush. And living in Ohio, northeastern Ohio, just outside the Cleveland area, we were Rush fanatics, and the early Rush stuff was great. The live album, All the World a Stage, was great. My brother actually had this album, and he also had they had the first three Rush albums come out in one package, kind of like the Kiss originals, and I listened to them like crazy. Fly By Night Rush and Caress of Steel. 2112 was another one. Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres. All those albums were huge for me. It really got me into kind of really cool chord stuff. Alex soloing was great. I mean, the solo on La Villa Strangiato, I think, is one of the greatest solos ever. Alex just plays some beautiful stuff on there with Neil's drumming, and just the atmosphere of that middle section just had a huge impact on me. So I can't leave Rush out. There's probably a lot of other bands and players that I'm forgetting, and I'm sure there is. That's why I'm going to do part 2. But Rush was definitely in the mix too of something that really influenced me. So that takes us up to late 83, I think it was, or early 84. I was over at my friend's house, as I talked about, playing cards, and all of a sudden this song come on the radio, and I didn't really pay attention to the song. Then a solo came on, and it just blew my mind like the first time I heard Van Halen. There's only been like a couple players that have blown my mind. That was, when I first heard them, it changed everything. That was Eddie Van Halen, and the next one was Yngwie. Yngwie, I can't even stress what an impact this album had on me. My picking, it changed everything. I've done tons of videos on it. So this album is just mind-blowing. I can't even put it into words. And I think this would be a good place to stop. And in part 2, when I talk about my favorite guitar albums and guitar players, we'll pick up and start with this album and get into the whole shred era, all the Shrapnel guys, Tony McAlpine, David Chi Chastain, Vinnie Moore, Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, Joey Tafoya, Greg Howe. We'll cover all those incredible, legendary players, and I'll talk about their impact and albums and how they influenced me. So Anyway, this is a lot of fun going down memory lane. I really enjoy this. I'm going to do a lot more of this kind of stuff too. It won't all be lessons, but I just like getting on here and chatting about my favorite albums with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed it too. And just thanks for all the nice comments and everyone watching my videos and liking and subscribing. You guys are awesome. And I really want to thank you all for that. So until next time, have fun picking.